Welcome to the Bangalore International Center. The Bangalore International Center has been around for more than a decade now, and we've been very fortunate in having the uh, use of the Terry Auditorium thanks to Terry's generosity. But we will be moving into our own building in the next month or so. It's just down the road, 48,000 square feet, with a large auditorium, with seminar and a good stage, so you can have performance. Not I don't mean like the speaker, but certainly dancers and music and so on. And many people have worked very hard on it. But of course, Ravichandra, whom we saw on the platform just now, has done most of the really hard work. So thank you, Ravi. I'm here only because Ravi suggested. I heard him say that Ravi suggested that I should say a few words. Ram, I don't propose to steal your thunder. You are doing the introduction. But I just wanted to say that Rajmohan and I were together from 1954. We did our masters in Delhi University together. And from the time that I've known him, how do I say this without appearing to be flattering? One doesn't think of Rajmohan for his lineage. One thinks of Rajmohan for the work that he has done, the work of scholarship that he has done. And what he did in Bombay during the emergency, when he brought out the Himmat, which was a very powerful voice. And that was a good place to read about what is happening in India. He's been a journalist. He started his life, if I remember rightly, in the Edinburgh Scotsman, but went on to become editor of the Indian Express in Madras. Fortunately, when I was also in Madras, so that is very nice. And he's gone on since then. Apart from many other things, which I'm sure you're going to hear from Ram, he has written a number of absolutely fabulous biographies on all the people that one thinks of when one thinks of India becoming independent. And after that, I just finished reading Ram's third volume on India, and it's an amazing book. It's an amazing work of scholarship. And I'm delighted that Ram is here to talk to Rajmohan Gandhi, because you cannot think of two better scholars. And by scholars, I mean people who have read, who have studied, who really thought deeply about the things that they're written about. So, Rajmohan, welcome to Bangalore. Welcome to the Bangalore International Center, and we're all looking forward to listening to you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Surendra. Thank you all. Before I come to Rajmohan Gandhi, I'd like to say just a couple of words about Ravichandra.
Now spare me this here, please.
John Arlott, the great British cricket writer and broadcaster, toured with the Indians in the summer of 1946 in England, and his first book is called Indian Summer. And there's a line in that book about Vijay Hazare, and it goes like this: Hazare is a man who hides and runs away when he is being praised, which is rather atypical of Indians, shall we say, from top to bottom. So I'd like to congratulate Ravi and his team for all they've done to make this BIC and the next BIC possible. Rajmohan Gandhi owes his very existence to Bangalore. Sahi hai na? Bilkul sahi hai. His father proposed to his mother in Bangalore on a park bench. We like to think it's Kaman Park. It could have been Lal Bagh, it could have been Krishna Rao Park, and so on and so forth. So he owes his whole existence to Bangalore. He is the second in a family of 4 extraordinary siblings. Surendra alluded to his lineage. What is special about these 4 siblings, as distinct from other families carrying similar names, is that from the time they came to adult consciousness, they have asked themselves not what this country can do for me, but what I can do for this country. It's been my very great privilege to have known all four siblings. His sister Tara, who is a social worker and ran the Kasturba Gandhi Trust for many years. His late brother, the brilliant philosopher Ramachandra Gandhi, the most gifted philosopher of his generation, and unarguably the most entertaining and insightful speaker of any generation. Sort of the Mallikarjun Mansoor of public speaking, if you know what I mean, was his Tambi Ramchandra, and his youngest brother Gopal, whose writings and speeches and public contributions all of you know. Rajmohan, as Surendra mentioned, studied at Delhi University, at St. Stephen's College, then the Delhi School of Economics, then he went to the Scotsman. He started his weekly magazine Himmat in 1964. There is no parallel for Himmat really in the history of Indian journalism. Possibly Adi Gorwala's opinion, which was smaller, also run by liberal sensibility, but without the wide range of writings that Himmat had. I came of consciousness more or less after Himmat collapsed. But in a few weeks I spent in Panchgani, Asia Plateau, I came across the entire run of Himmat, and someone should digitize them if they have not been done yet. He then started writing books. Is your Rajaji your first book?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, among his many books are three outstanding biographies of three of the greatest modern Indians, in order of their publication. Rajaji, first in 2 volumes, then in an abridged 1-volume edition from Penguin. Sardar Patel, which is a book I recommend to everyone who wants to know the truth about Sardar Patel, not the spin about Sardar Patel. It was published in Navjivan in 1991. Then his biography, Mohandas, published 15 years later.
Which was launched by Ram here in Bangalore.
That's right, also, yeah. Apart from these 3 magisterial biographies, there are also some fascinating thematic works that he's written. I'd particularly recommend The Good Boatman, which is an interpretive understanding of Gandhi's political thought and ideas. It has a wonderful chapter on Gandhi and Ambedkar, an equally good chapter called Sons and Heirs, which should also be mandatory reading to all those who want to understand why Nehru rather than Patel became the first Prime Minister of India. Then there's a book published quite a lot earlier called Understanding the Muslim Mind, which is again a series of portraits of unusual, remarkable, controversial Indians, including Iqbal, Azad, Jinnah, and several others. Most recently, he's published an important comparative study of the 1857 revolt in India and the Civil War in the United States, a book on the Punjab, and of course, the book we're going to discuss today. Now, I'd like to say 2 things in conclusion about Rajmohan. I've known him for many years. His courage, not just during the emergency, which Surendra has mentioned, but also in combating communal discord. His work in bringing about peace and reconciliation in Kashmir, in Nagaland, his public service as a parliamentarian is quite extraordinary. And always with a sense of, my favorite memory of Rajmohan is 26 January 1993, the first Republic Day after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. I scarcely knew him then. I may have met him once in his brother's house, but certainly not had a conversation with him. And there was a march. It was the first Republic Day after the Babri Masjid, and the secular, democratic, Republican, non-communal citizens of Delhi took out a march down Rajpath, and Rajmohan rightly was in the front of that march. And he was, in his character, in his scholarship, in his public spiritedness, he is, as he stands, tall and straight. But without telling you he's tall and straight. And apart from his scholarship, I have always admired him for his extraordinary principle and courage. Now, I'd like to say two things about him in conclusion. He will speak about his history of South India that he's just published. The first is they're both about his lineage. The first is something he shares with his grandfather. And that is a remarkable capacity to spot talent, nurture it, and then set it free. Gandhi had that. I mean, Gandhi spotted Patel, Nehru, Kriplani, Azad, Kamala Devi, so on and so forth, nurtured them, allowed them to reach their full greatness and set them free, to argue with him and debate with him and so on. Rajmohan has that. One of the less known aspects of his work is the kinds of people he nurtured at Himmat, and the contributions those people have continued to make in our public, intellectual and literary life. Kalpana Sharma is one of his proteges. The late Shahnaz Anklesaria is one of his proteges. Sanjoy Hazarika, our leading expert on the Northeast, is one of his proteges. Nirja Chaudhary, arguably our most insightful and independent-minded political commentator, is one of his proteges. And his publisher, David Davidar, finally. All these people, I probably left out some names, but these are the kinds of people he trained at Himmat and set them free. The last story I want to tell about Rajmohan has to do with cricket. It was told by... So, one of the things that Rajmohan and I share is a love of cricket. And that sets... We have both written books on Gandhi, and that's one thing we do not share with Gandhi. And the story has to do with his father, Devdas Gandhi, Gandhi's youngest son, who was... it's irrelevant to the theme of his book, but you'll permit me this story anyway, because it's such a wonderful story. Gandhi's youngest son, Devdas, Rajmohan's father, loved cricket. I think how he managed, I think that came for Rajaji. Rajaji, his other grandfather, his father-in-law, Devdas's father-in-law liked cricket. But the son, Gandhi's son, Devdas, loved cricket. He was editor of the Hindustan Times, and he probably gave, lots of the front page over to cricket, except that India didn't win many matches that day, at that time. There was a Hindustan Times scoreboard at the Ferozshah Kotla test. Now, in the summer of 1948, 6 months after Gandhi died, Devdas Gandhi found himself in London. He was on the board of Reuters. He had gone for a meeting of newspaper editors in London. This, as those of you who know cricket will recall, this was the summer of Bradman's last tour. It was his triumphant march as captain of the Australian cricket team in England in 1948. Devdas Gandhi was in England and wanted to watch Bradman bat. He found out that there was a Saturday free after his Reuters meeting, and there was a test match in Nottingham, which is about 2 hours away. He took a train on Friday evening, but the whole world had come to see Bradman bat, so he got a ticket because he had a press pass. So he got a ticket. He had a ticket to watch the match, but there was no hotel room in the whole of Nottingham. The only room he found was in the Nottingham County Jail. So Gandhi's son, who unlike Gandhi was a cricket lover, was able to watch Bradman bat courtesy of a British jail. Now, one day I hope, after his wonderful history of South India that we're going to discuss, Rajmohan will give us an autobiography with many such stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, and thank you, Surendra, very much. Thanks to all of you for coming, traveling this long distance. It's no joke making a respectable travel in Bangalore. Now, either I'm too tall or this mic is too obstinate. Okay, not bad. So now these wonderful people that Ram mentioned as my proteges, they are not my proteges. They are wonderful colleagues of mine. It just so happened that they and we kind of met at the right time, and we worked together. I learned as much from them as they might have learned from me. Now, I want to say at the outset that this talk is going to be absolutely historical about the past. Any connection to the present is purely coincidental and unintended. No, and I mean this. I've written this story about 17th century, 18th, 19th, 20th century South India and the first 18 years of 21st century South India. But wherever I go, people want to know about today or tomorrow or some stray sentence. There's a sentence somewhere here about APJ Abdul Kalam. That has made the media all across. So please, this is very boring. I know nobody likes only to stay in the past, but I now invite you to surrender your interest in the present, in the controversies of the present, and be prepared to really know about the past. And I'm going to read bits from my book to begin with, so you can know what it covers. So the first portion I'm going to read is the beginning of the 18th century. So it's 100 years after I start my story. As South Indians entered the 18th century, the curious among them, including outsiders in their midst, may have tried to imagine the years that lay ahead. A local Dobash in Golconda, now Hyderabad, or a Gujarati trader in Madras, there were a few of these before the year 1700, a European missionary in the hinterland, there were some of them too, a Dutch merchant on the Malabar coast, also present and visible, or someone else on the peninsula may have wondered about the future. Aurangzeb was past 80 but alive. Under him, the Mughals had crushed the Deccan Sultanates in the 1670s, 1680s, and added new territories and numbers to their empire. European companies were soliciting his favors. Our nameless visualizer, in the year 1700, may have expected the Mughal grip to tighten, and Shivaji having died in 1680, the Maratha eruption to subside. In the coastal contest among Europeans, he or she might have predicted a tussle between the British and the Dutch, for the latter had secured their presence in the Malayalam country and in Sri Lanka. However, history rolled out differently. First, Mughal power weakened, and by the 1740s, the Marathas were energized. Second, instead of an Anglo-Dutch rivalry, the 60-year period covered by this chapter witnessed a roller coaster battle between the French and the British. Third, the period saw the emergence, at times through alliance with Europeans, of a few powerful local individuals in the South. Finally, towards this period's end, Europeans widened their nets beyond trade and their control beyond the coast. They started to extract revenue from South Indian land. So this is the first bit I will read. And now I will come to the Hyder and Tipu phase, which of course is very relevant to all of you here. I use a good deal of what Mark Wilkes wrote about Hyder and Tipu. Many of you are familiar with Mark Wilkes's books. Some of you may not be. I know that Mohibul Hassan, who wrote this very interesting book on Tipu, is very, very critical of Mark Wilkes, and rightly so. Mark Wilkes came as a soldier. He was not a historian, but he did write long histories of this part of the world. But what I want people here to understand is this, or I'll just read this. Impressions of Hyder and Tipu are provided in the 4 volumes on Mysore's rulers, written in the 1810s by Mark Wilkes, who arrived in India as an 18-year-old soldier for the East India Company, joined the war against Tipu, helped run Mysore as a resident after Tipu's death, and then as company's governor of St. Helena, oversaw Napoleon's internment on the remote South Atlantic island. Wilkes confronted Tipu, and Wilkes was Napoleon's jailer in St. Helena. In 1816, Wilkes discussed Britain's new possession in the East India with the defeated French emperor. So he and Napoleon talked about Tipu and about India and so forth. Modern Indian historians, including Mohibul Hassan and Irfan Habib, have with good reason charged Wilkes, a participant in a historic clash rather than its detached observer, with bias. Anyway, so that is, I wanted to give you this, this picture, and then something else about Hyder and Tipu, or rather Tipu and Napoleon. The fall of Srirangapatna on 4th May 1799 was a huge imperial event, which even Napoleon's later defeat in 1815 could not greatly eclipse. For years afterwards, British novelists, Walter Scott among them, and British artists would pair the Corsican Napoleon and the Mysorean Tipu. In April 1800, a few months after Tipu's death and defeat, an enormous canvas 21 feet high and 120 feet long. Imagine, an enormous canvas 21 feet high and 120 feet long, portraying the storming of Seringapatam, would open in London, done by a young artist called Robert Kerr Porter, which Londoners would flock to see over the following 9 months. Now, I have got a few facts about Diwan Purnaiya here, which maybe are not so well known, and I would invite you to discover those. But here is something that Mark Wilkes discovered from Purnaiya about Tipu, because Mark Wilkes was very friendly with Purnaiya after the British took over. So this is about Tipu and his application and his concentration. And Wilkes says that messages to his officers or his envoys, emissaries in different parts of the country were often written by Tipu in his own hand. A secret emissary sent to Pune, because Tipu at one stage tried to see if there could be some understanding between the Marathas and himself, when the British were absolutely all around him. Sent to Pune had evidently informed Tipu in report after report that his cash had been expended. This emissary said, I have no money. He kept writing, I have no money. Send me some money to Tipu. After several months of inaction, Tipu finally gave a draft to a secretary, saying, let this draft be dispatched to our man in Pune. Here I am, said the secretary, who in fact was the former emissary. Having returned for some weeks from mere necessity, he had shown up daily at the Darbar, but Tipu had not noticed. Mark Wilkes writes, and this is from Purnaiya, quote, the Sultan for once hung down his head. Okay, now I'll move really forward. And this is Rajaji's final speech in 1939. You may remember in 1939 there were various Congress ministries all across India. And at the start of the war, and because the British didn't consult India before making India a party in the war, the Congress ministries resigned, including CR. He was the premier of Madras Presidency, as some of you will know. So just before resigning, he gave a speech, and I will read some lines from this. CR's speech on 26 October 39 was a classic farewell to empire from a proud antagonist. Quote, the British are a democratically governed people, but they are an imperialist people. They do not want any other people to rule over them, but the Secretary of State is to rule over India. Has America joined the war? No, this is 1939. America joined the war only after Pearl Harbor. Has America joined the war? No. Cash and carry, that is their formula. Do we say anything so bad? No, we say, let us not go at the end of a leash, but as a free people. We could have had Swaraj in the palm of our hand if the Muslim League had played the game. We could even have fought afterwards amongst ourselves. Recalling the greatest of the plays of the greatest of poets, CR cited from King Lear, quote, the eldest daughter said to the king, I love you more than words can wield the matter, dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty. Lear was pleased and said, take this vast portion of my kingdom. The next girl said she loved him even more. She also got an ample share. But the third daughter said, I love you as I should, neither more nor less. I cannot give away all my love to you. I have got to keep a portion of it for my future husband. Lear got angry. Rajaji says, Congress cannot give all its love to Britain. It must reserve that which is India's share. alluding to measures planned but not passed, including the law laying down anew the relationship between zamindars and tenants. This was a law that T. Prakasham afterwards was to introduce, but of course the government resigned. CR added, quote, "The house was bedecked, the bride was to come in, but no, we say suddenly, the pandal is to be pulled down," unquote. So this is to give you a flavor of this man who, with Periyar Ramasamy, occupies several pages in this story. And finally, this is from Karnataka, and you know this very well. Gauri Lankesh's father. So I mentioned the fact that many of the Gnanpith winners are from Karnataka, which all of you know. Of the 14 South Indian recipients until the year 2000 of the Gnanpith Award for Literature, 7, I speak of Anantamurthy also, 7 including Anantamurthy, wrote in Kannada, which was not the primary language in the homes where 3 of the 7 had been raised. The parents of the Dattatreya Ramachandra Bendre, a Chitpavan born in Dharwad, spoke Marathi. Those of Masti Venkatesh Iyengar, who was born in Kolar district, spoke Tamil, while Girish Karnad, linked like Bendre to Dharwad, was born to a Konkani-speaking father in Mathiran in Maharashtra. Other acclaimed writers in Kannada had Telugu and Malayali origins. Yet there was more to Kannada literature than linguistic surprise. Like their literary counterparts in Konkani, Malayalam, Tamil, and Telugu, the Kannada country's poets, novelists, and playwrights captured the heroism of the unrecognized. The following lines were written about his rural mother by P. Lankeshappa, better known as P. Lankesh, and translated from the Kannada original by Sharda Prasad. So I'm reading to you Sharda Prasad's translation about Lankesh's poem about his mother, who had just died. Savitri, Sita, Urmila she was not, or stately Shanta or Shweta of legend. She was unlike the wife of Gandhi or Ramakrishna. She worshipped no god, heard no epic tales sung, did not even wear vermilion as a married woman. My mother lived for grain and straw, for toil for children, for a roof overhead, for rice for a blanket, for being able to walk head held high among equals. To her my salute and tears of thanks, for bearing me, rearing me, for living on the earth and going away with cool casual words on her lips as if she was going from home to the field. So that's all from the book. Now just a few thoughts, and I hope, by the way, I think they want to hear you as much as they want to hear me, Ram. So we ought to have a conversation too. I'm very grateful that this young author is willing to introduce an older friend. I was going to say willing to introduce a struggling writer, but I said an older friend. So this book, of course, it's a history book. It is not an attempt to identify heroes and villains from the past. It's not. The attempt in the book, successful or not, is to recall the times, to recall the 17th century to the best of my ability, to recall the 18th century to the best of my ability, 19th, 20th. It is not to identify heroes and villains. Of course, my South India is South India south of the Marathi country and south of Orissa. Now, the Maharashtrian country is very deeply involved in the story, especially of Karnataka, but of all of South India, Tanjore and so forth, Telugu country. But Marathi history, except insofar as it takes place in southern India, is not part of this book, nor is the history of Odisha. But south of Orissa, south of Maharashtra, everything is sort of covered in this. Nilakanta Shastri wrote in 1955 his great book, From Prehistoric Times, South India to the Fall of Vijayanagara. So my story starts after the fall of Vijayanagara, after the Battle of Talikota, starts in the early 17th century. So I go forward in time from about 1600, forward in time, but I keep going sideways in space because I have to cover this entire range of South India. Forward in time, sideways in space. Of course, we should recognize that southern India was a deeply divided, very unstable, a very warring place in that time. It was not a peaceful part of the world. A Jesuit priest called something Baradas writes about a war in 1616 or 1617 in the Trichy region. And according to him, he may have exaggerated, according to him, that war involved 1 million soldiers. 1 million soldiers. He may have exaggerated, but even a war with 1/10 of that kind of army or armies would have killed so many people and consumed so much grain. So that is one thing to remember, that when the Europeans came, southern India was not a united piece or a stable piece. It was really a warring area. There was violence, there was instability. Now, some of you are aware of these three wonderful historians. Velcheru Narayan Rao, Sanjay Subramaniam, and David Shulman. Each is absolutely astonishing. They've written some amazing things about 16th, 17th century southern India, and I've got lots of my information from them. David Shulman, he's an Israeli Jew, but he's a master of several South Indian languages. He's a fighter for Palestinian rights. He's an incredible man. But these three I want to mention because they have helped me a lot, as have so many others. So in 1760, the British finally defeat the French in this famous Battle of Wandiwash, 1760. But if you read what is in this book, you will recognize that it was by no means inevitable that the British were going to win. It was perfectly possible for the French also to have won. So that did not happen, but it is good to recognize that it happened. Of course, there is British divide and rule that is very much evident in various pages of this book. Here I should depart a little bit from this book to tell you something about Churchill and Wavell. In March 45, when Wavell was the viceroy in India and Churchill was still the prime minister just before he was voted out by the British people, Wavell was in London to talk with Churchill about what the future policy should be with India. Churchill said to me, these are Churchill's words quoted by Wavell in his diary. He said, before you leave, make sure that India is divided into Hindustan, Pakistan, Princesstan, etc. This was March 45. In August 45, Vallabhbhai Patel, who had come out of prison just 2 months earlier, he said this: the British talk of Hindu-Muslim quarrels, but who has thrust this burden on their shoulders? Give me a week's rule over Britain, I will create such disagreements that England, Wales, Scotland will fight one another forever. Now here is something that I also want to quote from an earlier period because it describes, if I can get my page number here. So this is when Prithvi Raj, this is talking about the 11th, 12th century, and there was a Turkish emissary who was meeting Prithvi Raj. And it is a very famous epic song or ballad that is known in North India very well called Prithvi Raj something. Prithvi Raj Vijay. So here is something from there. According to this poet who is glorifying Prithvi Raj, and he's describing this meeting between this emissary of Gauri who has come to meet Prithvi Raj. The poet calls the visitor a cow killer, and he adds, quote, the color of his beard, his eyebrows, his very eyelashes was yellower than the grapes that grow in his native region. Horrible was his speech. Horrible was his speech, like the cry of wild birds. All his phonemes were impure, all his pronunciations were impure, impure as his complexion. He had what looked like skin disease, so ghastly white he was. Now, I quote this to recognize a very important truth that becomes apparent to anyone who studies the past. The Europeans who came to India, like this Turk who came to Prithviraj's court, he had studied, this Turk had, with all his horrible phonemes and pronunciations, he had studied the Indian language and mastered it. He was trying to understand the Indians. The British who came to divide and rule, many of them, also learned so many of our languages. But most of us, we regarded these foreigners as impure, strange, with peculiar food, peculiar habits. We disdained them. We had contempt for them. We did not study them. They studied us. Therefore, they ruled us. And after, so my book tries to figure out how, as I mentioned earlier, they moved from trade to extracting revenue from Indian land. Then they conquered India, defeating all the dividing and ruling, and the Indian rulers were not willing to, of course, to talk to each other or to be united. And then they moved from conquest to governance. And what was the most important change in policy when they did that, from conquest to governance? A drive for knowledge, a drive for information. Studying our languages, studying the countryside, studying our animals, studying our plants. Not just making maps, not just doing the trigonometry and calculating the heights of mountains, but really understanding as much of India as they could. This Mackenzie collection, some of you are aware of this. There was this civil servant called Colin Mackenzie, something Mackenzie anyway, Colin. And he came to begin with. He was Surveyor General and all that. So he came, he was very interested in the ability of South Indian Brahmins in particular in mathematics. So he wanted to learn that. How have you mastered this mathematics? But then he somehow was led to discover all kinds of cultural, literary artifacts, information, historical information. The kaifiyats, as they were called, pieces of information about many, many parts of South India. He collected, and this is part of the Tamil Nadu archives and elsewhere too, I imagine. Thousands and thousands, not all of them very valuable, not all of them very accurate, but whatever he could find in villages. And he had some wonderful Indian colleagues, absolutely fantastic Indian scholars and colleagues who also did that. But this is an important part of the story, is how the British moved from conquest to governance largely by assembling incredible information. Tipu's death, of course, was a very major event. After that, the British conquest was virtually unchallenged. For 10 years after he was killed, for 10 years, there was a spate of rebellions in the Tamil country, in Kerala also, and elsewhere in the south. There was the Valor Mutiny of 1806 that some of you know of. Many people speak of the Valor Mutiny as some kind of predecessor for the 1857 event. It is partly true, but it's much more accurate to see the Valor Mutiny as part of the rebellion that was connected to Tipu's defeat, which, of course, in Kattabomman in Tamil country and the Marudu brothers Jasi Raja in Kerala, and also Veluthampi in Kerala. So these were all great rebellions. The Kittur rebellion was much later. It was 1824, Rani Chennamma. But for 10 years after Tipu was killed, there were these outbursts, but they were not, of course, effective, and British rule was more or less established after that time. What can I say about, yes, thereafter, there was, from one angle, amazing stability. It cannot be denied that British rule in southern India did bring, and in the rest of India for a long time, this stability, which resulted in many remarkable things. And then pretty soon, apart from sporadic attempts, violent attempts to somehow disrupt or British rule, there were organized attempts, more democratic attempts. There was the formation of the International Congress. There were the social reform movements. And there was a great debate, which is more important, independence or social reform? And there was another debate, is social reform enough or social revolution is needed? Social justice is as important as Indian independence. There was a tremendous debate, and of course, Periyar Ramasamy and many others, and of course in Kerala, Srinivas Guru, Srinarayan Guru. And so that's the clash or the coincidence, the cooperation between the social reform movements and the independence movements. At times they clashed and converged, at times they separated, and at times there was tension between the two. All that is, of course, also part of the story. I think I will maybe stop here, because I've gone on long enough, and maybe there should be some questions and conversations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. I will maybe start with a few questions, and then we can open it up. Mohan?
Please.
Yeah. So just have 3 or 4. You know, as you point out, South India was not a peaceful place, and there were many bloody battles through the late medieval period. But then you also add that there was a period of stability, and I want to come to that. You know, in terms of most social indicators, South India is well ahead of North India, by and large, and that has given a sense of pride or regional patriotism to many South Indians. But my sense is that at least part of our relative success in social and economic and human development terms is a question of luck. So in 1799, as you point out, Tipu lost his final battle. Now, it's now 220 years, and South India has known no major episode of large-scale violence, which may make it unique in the entire world. In North America, as you pointed out, there was the Civil War. Europe was racked by bloody world wars, Japan, China, Civil War, Africa, countless civil wars. North India, partition, which was horrific, which we largely escaped. Likewise, our wars with Pakistan and China, really affected the North and to some extent the West. So, I just like your, just your initial reactions to this. If you have social peace over 220 years, you're likely to economically develop, you're likely to empower your women and Dalits in ways in which those who are subject to conflict do not. So have we just been plain lucky rather than smart, as we like to believe ourselves to be?
Whether it is earned luck or undeserved luck. It's working. I think it is something to be grateful for, and I wouldn't totally rule out that the luck was deserved also. But yes, it is a very interesting and important fact that by and large, there was this long period of peace. There is one major, what's the word, exception to this was during the so-called police action in Hyderabad. When a large number of people were killed, and this was not known at the time. When I wrote my Patel biography, I was not aware of this. So in my Patel biography, when I describe the move into Hyderabad, I just cite the official documents. There's this book by S.N. Prasad, Operation Polo, and I gave the figure. Even there, the figures were about 4,000 people killed, it said. And they said they were mostly the Razakars who were killed, not the Hyderabad army. The Hyderabad army did not put up any fight. But subsequent research has shown, and this Sundarlal committee report, which many of you may know, the figures are disputed, but we should recognize that in Hyderabad, and in not just the city, but in the state of Hyderabad, during the police action days, and in days immediately thereafter, in about 2 weeks or so, really a very large number of people were killed. Many, many thousands were killed. And some were killed by these were mostly Muslims, and some were killed by their Hindu neighbors, but the vast majority were killed either by people who came in from neighboring states. From Sholapur there was quite, but also in some cases by the Indian army. So I mentioned this also in my book. But this is an exception. But again, one can say that this was the result of, you might say, intervention from outside the area.
I think one, of course, is intervention outside the area. The other was, of course, this is absolutely not to excuse the violence, but the provocation by Razakars, by Jinnah recognizing, sending an emissary and all of that. So it's kind of, like you say, the Vellore revolt is is a postscript to Tipu. This is part of partition. This is part of the partition violence.
And even the soldiers who came and were alleged to be involved in this were many of them from Punjab. So they were carrying those memories. That's a valid point.
So just linked to this South-North and our luck, but whether our luck is partly earned or partly deserved, there is a sentiment that the South has not mattered enough in the life of the Republic. You mentioned that is politically and economically. Culturally, we batted above our weight. You had this statistic about our Gyanpith awardees, and there have been several since. I think Kambar comes after that. And Bangalore has an important role here because, as you said, the Kannada writers are often speaking other languages at home. Now, Bangalore itself is at the tri-junction of 3 linguistic zones. And it's an interesting factoid which probably deserves to be better known. That Central College has produced 4 Bharat Ratnas. They're very proud of it. I mean, it's one institution that has produced 4 Bharat Ratnas. Now, what they don't tell you, what they should tell you, is that of those 4 Bharat Ratnas, 2 had Tamil as their mother tongue and 2 had Telugu. Okay, now the Tamils who had the Tamil Bharat Ratna from Central College were your own Tata Rajaji and C.V. Raman, and the Telugus were Chintamani, Nageshwar, Ramachandra Rao, C.N.R. Rao, and Vishweswaraya. All right. Now, and you will recall that Nehru, I think, somewhere talks about Hyderabad being the second capital of India. Probably Bangalore has a better claim, though it'll lead to even more traffic gridlock here. But what I wanted to just ask you, Mohan, is this sense, in the lead up to the last Karnataka Assembly election, our ex-Chief Minister Siddaramaiah played this up. He said, we subsidize the North. I mean, he gave some figures, and Surendra is here, there may be some other economists here who can testify to how reliable they are. But this sense that for every rupee we get from the central government, we give 4 rupees. For every rupee that UP gives, it gets 5 rupees, and so on and so forth. So there is a sense, and this is something that it's one of the growing fractures of the Republic. We recognize the Hindu-Muslim divide, we recognize the rich-poor divide, we recognize the man-woman divide. Those are real fractures across the Republic. But the North-South issue also is something maybe, and as you also have other hats. I mean, you're a political commentator, former editor, former MP. Just tell us a little bit about how you see this. Is this really just unjustified screaming by the South, or does this have an element of a real fracture?
It is, of course, a very, very real truth that you describe. But there's another angle to this. One question that I ask 3 or 4 times in the course of this book, and I devote 2 or 3 pages towards the end of the book to this, is this question. Why has the South been reluctant to assume national leadership? There have been invasions north to south. There have been very few invasions south to north. Kanyakumari has been a magnet. The Himalayas have not been a magnet for South Indians. Now, Rajaji became Governor General of India. So when he became Governor General of India, he was constitutionally the #1 citizen of India, Indian, for the first time after Bahadur Shah Zafar. Bahadur Shah Zafar was the previous Indian, although some people may say he was not an Indian. I think he was an Indian. Some people may say that Rajaji also didn't come from the people, of the South. But Bahadur Shah Zafar in 1857, and then C. Rajgopalachari in 1948 is the #1 citizen of India. But Rajaji, although he at times differed with Gandhi also in 41, 42, quit India, all that, he differed with Gandhi. But he was reluctant to claim national leadership. Occasionally he was thrust into national leadership. He was content with looking after the South. Kamaraj, some years later, also became very influential. He was the Congress president when Nehru died. He ushered Lal Bahadur Shastri into the prime ministerial chair. He ushered Indira Gandhi into the prime ministerial chair. But he too was reluctant. And of course, a common factor in the reluctance or the inability or the unwillingness of these two to claim national leadership is, of course, Hindi. Yeah. So the British who ruled India learned the Indian languages, and if the Kannada speakers want to rule all of India, they will have to learn Hindi too. Yeah. So this is a great question to ask. Why are the South Indians hesitant, reluctant, shy to cross the threshold from tremendous achievements, great achievements in so many fields, to claiming the leadership of India?
That's a great question, but I don't think we'll accept Hindi. If you look at, there was a report in today's parliamentary proceedings, the Rajya Sabha, where Harivansh, who both you and I know, is a very good man. I mean, he's one of the nicest people who could have been deputy speaker or speaker. He's from the JDU. He's a former journalist. He's deputy speaker in the Rajya Sabha. And he said, he's a very polite, understated person. He said, to Kanimori was speaking, and he said something like, "Aap bahut samay le rahe hain." And Kanimori said, "Speak to me in a language I can understand." This happened today. I'm not reproducing verbatim, but I think this, we'll have to claim our leadership in a different way, because you cannot convince, certainly you can't convince the Tamil or the Kannada. I think those major southern languages will ever concede that Hindi is a pathway to any form of greatness.
Wait a second. So English can be learnt.
Yes.
If we go to America or England, we will learn. Yes, we will learn German also. We will learn French. We will learn Japanese. But we won't learn Hindi.
That's because English is neutral. I see in you, in this debate, I think you speaking on behalf of Gandhiji and me speaking on behalf of Rajaji. You know what I mean.
No, but I want Kannada speakers for whom Hindi may be a second or third, fourth language, but able to speak to the people of UP, speak to the people of Bihar, speak to the people of Rajasthan, to lead them, to guide them, to steer them. So this absolutely understandable reluctance or hostility is I think, if it can be overcome, right, it will help India. It will also help South India.
So my next question is about Rajaji, on whom you wrote a major and pioneering biography. And one of the really appealing aspects of Rajmohan's political writing, not relevant to much of his other work, is that he rejects these false and binary polarities. Nehru versus Patel, Gandhi versus Ambedkar. Yes, Gandhi versus Savarkar he chooses and I also choose. That's a separate thing. But he finds a way of recognizing that in challenging the caste system, you needed both Gandhi and Ambedkar. In his writings on Patel, he shows us how India needed both Nehru and Patel. I mean, you show that quite beautifully in your book on Patel and in some of your other writing. But I now want to ask you a question about which is of a later period and which is to do with Nehru and Rajaji. You know, they were very close. After Patel died for a period, Rajaji was more or less Nehru's closest confidant in government, 50-51, after he had become Home Minister and so on. But then they later diverged. Now, there's a wonderful line in Walter Crocker's book on Nehru. Walter Crocker enormously admired Rajaji. He thought he was the most brilliant Indian, maybe the most brilliant statesman he had met anywhere. And he says in that book, he says, the rift between Nehru and Rajaji hurt India. He says, I mean, I'm quoting from memory, but he says, together they could have achieved so much. And then he says, for the rift, both were responsible. Now, of course, you are not only the biographer of Rajaji, not only have you written on Nehru, you were very much an adult at this time when this lift was taking place. I mean, you were in your early to mid-20s, living, in Delhi while Nehru and Rajaji were superficially courteous. Nehru would come to your home, and when Rajaji came and talked to him, but this polarization was taking place. So, in retrospect, of course, clearly it hurt India that because Nehru needed counsel. After he needed some person who could speak truth to him in the way Rajaji spoke truth to Gandhi. But were both responsible?
Of course, both were responsible. And there's a letter that my father wrote to Rajaji around that time, and his open criticism of Nehru had started, saying that wouldn't Bapu have advised you to have a conversation with him and talk things over? Which was very difficult for Rajaji to do. I think it's very important to recognize that Rajaji was 14 years older than Nehru. He was also a very close colleague of Motilal Nehru. In 1921, they were both general secretaries of the Indian National Congress. So for Rajaji to accept Jawaharlal Nehru as kind of his leader was too much. And later on, for him to think of accepting Indira Gandhi as his leader, which also was a question before him, was too much. So his pride was involved. But so I think human nature does play a very large part here. Objectively, somebody might say that if Rajaji had stayed in the Congress, that if he had
moved back to Delhi, maybe.
And proposed resolutions in the Congress to change Congress policy, and opposed Nehru within the Congress, and maybe outvoted again and again. But that takes a lot of patience and stamina to invite defeat after defeat after defeat. So he preferred to be with a more congenial group and have his own party. So, yes, in theory, you could say that Rajaji should have stayed on in the Congress, fought his battles from within the Congress. It would have been fantastic. But it was maybe too much for the personality that we are speaking of.
And could Nehru have reached out more to Rajaji?
Of course,
yeah.
Without any doubt. Without any doubt. I think I have a tremendous love and regard for Nehru, by the way. He's one person on whom I have not written a complete biography, but I have followed his life, and I had personal interactions also with him, which were all very positive. And I have immense respect and admiration, a sense of marvel about this incredible man. But yes, there were very serious omissions. There was Rajaji, even Ambedkar. There were so many others that he could have had a more equal relationship with. And yes, the people of India loved him. The intellectuals loved him. The civil services were on his side. The media was on his side. The world was also full of admiration for Nehru. But I think Nehru should have worked more than he did to create. He did respect we all know about chief ministers and correspondence with chief ministers, all that is listening to speeches in the Lok Sabha of opposition leaders, all that granted. Nehru could and should have done much more to have his peers questioning him, challenging him, that he could have done.
But again, it's a mark of the grace and generosity of the politics of that time, in comparison to the debased vulgarity of the politics of our time, that Rajaji and Nehru were bitter political opponents for the last 5 or 6 years of Nehru's life. And then Nehru dies, and Rajaji writes this extraordinary obituary in Swarajya, where he says, 11 years younger than me, 1100 times more beloved of the nation. And then he goes on to say, now that he's gone, who will listen to me? At least he listened to my criticisms. And so he could have done something. Right? Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's a wonderful one. It is.
But I will also read something else to you. So Nehru, Rajaji, but we are not giving enough attention to Periyar. You see, we're talking about the South. We're not giving enough attention to the non-Brahmin movement, to the movements for social justice. This is critical for today's politics and for tomorrow. Is absolutely critical. So let me read to you something from Periyar. By the way, the Rajaji Periyar story is utterly fascinating. Utterly fascinating. It's part of this. Give me a second to find the page. Killing, this is Gandhi's assassination. Okay. So on the Mahatma's death, C.R. said, he was very dear to me. I do not grieve for him. He was walking to join and lead a prayer. He was a few minutes late, and so he was walking fast. How many of you would not like to die when running to pray? Then when he upturns the urn in the river in Calcutta. So it is all over, the world feels so empty. Do not demand love, begin to love and you will be loved. This is the law and no statute can alter it. If we do not follow the law and let the law die with the teacher, we shall indeed become accomplices to the murderer. Now, the killing had deeply affected Periyar too, who in an obituary suggested that India should be named Gandhi Nadu. Yet he continued to criticize Gandhi's endorsement of Varnashram Dharma. The view that Gandhi condoned only an idealized version of that goal, or did so to retain caste Hindu goodwill, not to divide society hierarchically, did not impress EVR. 3 years after the murder, Periyar offered his analysis of Gandhi's Mahatmahood and his assassination. The Brahmins, he wrote, quote, made Gandhi a Mahatma because he said he believed in the Vedas, the epics, and in Varnashram Dharma. The Brahmins assassinated him because he said that Allah and Ram were the same, that it was not the privilege only of Brahmins to be educated, and that the mosques seized by force should be vacated and returned to Muslims.
So my last question before we open it up, Mohan, is, again linked to your larger body of work. And this is, it's often, among the laments of the younger generation, is that, if you hear the kind of arguments, everywhere in India, if you go and speak on Nehru, you meet someone who would have solved the Kashmir dispute, who would have brought about a 10% rate of growth from 1947, who would have humiliated China on the battlefield. So this is the hindsight. And one of the things I'd like your reflections on, because it's often talked about, is this lament about partition. Now, in my understanding, partition, of course, has deep roots. It arguably goes back to separate electorates and so on. But certainly after the 46 elections, it was very hard to reverse it. And if it had been saved under the cabinet mission plan, the princes would have been more or less free. And I want to go back to this, brings us back to South India, and what your quote about Princess Tan, and Patel. Because Patel says, I think I'm quoting from memory, but I think it's in your Patel biography, where he says something like, an independent Hyderabad would be a cancer across the heart of India. Right? Now, so is it true that partition could only have been avoided with a very weak center and with the princely states more or less quasi-autonomous? And, you know, there are many North Indians in this room. If Hyderabad had been free, none of you could have come here. Right? So, you know, I'd like your reflections on this. You know, I mean, this whole lament, clearly, Mohan, it could have been avoided. Partition could have been accomplished with less loss of life, with the proper deployment of troops, which Mountbatten did not do, with more people like Gandhi willing to go out on the streets and bring about peace and harmony. But this lament for a united India, I mean, how do you see it?
I wholeheartedly endorse the lament. I must say this to you. I do not, I still regard partition as a very great tragedy for the subcontinent as a whole. A very great tragedy. Towards the end of his life, Gandhi was asked by an African American person from Washington when he was in Noakhali or in Calcutta, you have preached non-violence for 30 years. Why is there so much violence in India? So Gandhi gave an answer which I am paraphrasing. It's not his words, but this is what he meant to convey. Gandhi said, I have been teaching India for 30 plus years, two things: hate not and fear not. They accepted the fear not idea. You know, Nehru in his discovery, or somewhere he has written that Gandhi's great achievement was to rid, almost like a psychoanalyst, he identified an autobiography. He helped Indians to identify and remove their fear. But when Gandhi said, hate not, Gandhi said, you know, how many times, you know, when British individual, the idea that not a single Englishman was killed is absolute nonsense. Many Englishmen were killed in the Indian freedom movement. Not in thousands, but certainly significant numbers. And each time it happened, Gandhi would, in a Congress meeting, want the thing deplored or attacked. And sometimes he succeeded, and sometimes he failed. He was outvoted. No, we will not condemn. And according to Gandhi, the hatred we were willing to nurse against the British got transferred also, Hindu to Muslim, Muslim to Hindu. Not that the Hindu-Muslim hatred did not exist earlier. It did. But the endorsement of hatred. And I think there Gandhi was absolutely right. And yes, we may say that, all right, India without Pakistan is much easier to govern and so forth. In one way, it is true. But whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Kashmir, whether it is, if only we had managed to keep India one. It was very tough. And the reason why partition happened is that, on the one hand, Gandhi was preaching non-hatred. He was preaching goodwill. He was preaching partnership. But there were very active, very capable, very committed people on both sides who were preaching ill will, as is happening today. And as I have said more than once in recent days, even more impressive than winning India's independence was Gandhi's success, along with Nehru and Patel and Ambedkar, in making India a secular state in 47. In the last 2 or 3 years, 2 years of his life, people say, oh, Gandhi was no longer the kind of man he was earlier, that this was his. Actually, it was a tremendous part of his life. And but for his struggle, you know, British Krishna writes, Gandhi's close associate, who left St. Stephen's College in 1920 to work with Gandhi, that a taxi driver told him, when Gandhi arrived in Delhi in September of 47, oh, too bad Gandhi has come. We were going to expel all the Muslims from Delhi. Now that Gandhi is here, Patel will do his bidding. Jawaharlal is here. and the Muslims will stay now in Delhi. What a great shame. At that time, with refugees from West Punjab, Sikhs and Hindus who had very real, bitter, painful stories to tell, it was absolutely feasible. And Pakistan was the cry for Islamic State. Why not a Hindu state in India? But no. Gandhi, backed by Nehru, backed by Patel, backed by Ambedkar, who was in the cabinet. India will not be a Hindu state. It will be a state for all. And that being an Indian was not a religious test, not a cultural test, not a gender test, of course. You're born in India, you live in India, you're an Indian. Period. So anyway, it's too long an answer, but I think what you say, Ram, at one level is absolutely true, but at a deeper level, because if we don't understand that, then the further divisions we now have over caste and will also. So non-hate is relevant even today.
Thank you. I think we still have another 25 minutes for questions. Please keep them brief. Not about present politics, but about South India or Indian nationalism, social reform. Yeah, Siddharth.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to say it's a pleasure meeting you after 30 years almost when I was a young student. Met you with Sanjay and Charu many, many years ago. I just want to quote one section that I just happened to notice from the book and ask you a pointed question on that. You quote about the fact that this was about the ablest Indian in India, writing in 1934 about a Tamil Brahmin by the name of Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer. And you also make a reference to how CR taking the Dalits to the Padmanabha Swami temple and praising the Maharaja and I think the Diwan as well as being one of the ablest one. The question is this: the cadre that the colonial experiment developed in terms of Indian officers and the administrators and people like the traveling Diwans like C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, how much of a role did they play in the in the shaping, if you want to call it, of the emerging Indian state that came out in 1947?
Well, they obviously had a phenomenal role, and including in the creation of the Indian Constitution. We cannot underestimate the very great role they played. But maybe we could say that, we could ask this question: did they give sufficient attention to the caste question, the social justice question? They obviously paid a good deal of attention. But I think that the Indian polity, the Indian society in post-independence years has seen so many tensions, which possibly could have been better anticipated, and there could have been greater preparation to address those. Very easy now to say so, very difficult at that time, and there were challenges of partition and there were enormous challenges. But I think there was possibly an insufficient acknowledgement in the early years of independence of the potential power of the Ambedkar movement, of the non-Brahmin movement, of the social justice movement. I think that should be recognized.
I was impressed with the statement that fear not and also hate not. But the most important thing that I feel, I was born in the old Pakistan, lived there till I was 12 years old, and only moved when the partition was there. My father was in the government service, and you would be surprised to know that my father went back to Karachi and left us back, and at that time all the people used to say, oh, Pakistan will never remain, we'll all come together. That was the common man's appraisal of the whole thing. The second thing that hurts me very much is we not only are continuously creating hate against each other, but how can we not hate the British? It seems that the Churchill himself told Nehru at one time, how can it be that you can talk so normally to me, that you didn't hate me? So what I feel is why is this hate culture being developed? Like whether it is the Punjab thing, the Sikh thing, why everybody says they should apologize, but not one Indian or not many Indians believe that the British should apologize to us. But we always want people within the country where something has happened due to some kind of problem to apologize. The Sikhs say that they should apologize. The Muslims say they should apologize for a particular thing. But we never say that the British should apologize to us.
Shashi Tharoor wants the British to apologize.
Can I?
Wait. Yeah, the gentleman. I'll come to you. The gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful introduction and talk. Am I audible? Yeah. So, sir, I think there was some debate going on regarding this North-South issue. So, I have a question. Mr. Shri Kamraj proposed this three-language formula: English, Hindi, and regional language. So, one thing which we have observed is that the strong sentiment in India, in South India against Hindi and all, it's cropping up a long time. It's always been there. So I have not seen that in North India or in other parts of the country, the South Indian languages or maybe languages from the other part are not an option in school curriculum. Do you think for better national integration, we should have such kind of options in North India, and that will
That's a very good question, and that kind of links to the exchange Mohan and I had. Mohan, I think this three-language formula was finessed by the North Indians, and Sanskrit became their third language. So when you're asking Kanimori to learn Hindi, the question is, one of my all-time favorite stories, which I've told many times before, but I must repeat in the context of this, is in 1989, when Mulayam Singh Yadav, the great disciple of Rammohn Lohiya, Angrezi Hatao person, became Chief Minister of Kerala, of Uttar Pradesh for the first time, and he wrote a letter to E.K. Nayanar in Hindi, and the reply came back in Malayalam. So I think this finessing, where in the three-language formula, Sanskrit became for North Indians the third.
I think your point is valid. His answer clarifies why it could not work, but it could still be made to work. But anyway, no more discussion on that. I think it's, yeah.
Yeah, I find that in Karnataka, Tipu Sultan is valorized, and he's regarded as in a very good, the perception of Tipu Sultan is excellent, pretty good. But in my own hometown of Talasheri, Malabar, I find that, if a mother wants to discipline her children, she will say Tipu Sultan is coming. So there is a completely different perception of Tipu Sultan in Malabar, who is supposed to have, through force, converted a large number of Hindus into Muslims. So did he have a split personality, or how was he so different in Malabar and so different in Karnataka? A wonderful administrator in Karnataka and a terror in Malabar.
I think my shortest answer, and perhaps from my point of view the best answer, is please read the many pages about Tipu Sultan in this book. It will answer all your questions. Why he was loved in some areas, why he was hated in other areas, why he did what he did. Was ruthlessness and bigotry at the heart of his personality, or is there another explanation? Aap meri kitab padh le.
I'd like to get your comment on Michael Walzer's argument, The Paradox of Liberation, and his case studies are India, Algeria, and Israel, where he says the leaders of these liberation movements, who were largely educated overseas, had to put forward a consciousness that did not relate to current consciousness, which they felt like had acquiesced to domination over the last many centuries or years. And because they moved into a democracy, before the new consciousness got implanted, people who were not of the new consciousness acquired political power, and these liberation struggles invited fundamentalist counter-revolutions.
I think you ask a very important question. I don't know whether I'm really capable enough, of a theorist to answer your question. I would say that our freedom fighters, in human terms, were a very impressive lot. They had many weaknesses. They were not perfect. They understood the world. They understood India also, to a large extent. They were in tune with Indian thinking. They were in tune with the highest forms of global thinking. And you know that one reason why people of Indian origin are still, at this moment, so effective all over the world. In Australia, Canada, England, Europe, certainly United States, if you hear some expert talk about climate or about stocks and shares, or about science or medical, it is often a person of Indian origin talking in America. And one reason why people of Indian origin are so successful all over the world is it's connected even to our freedom movement. Our freedom movement was not hostile to the world. It was not hostile to the modern world, to the Western world. So anyway, these are just stray remarks, but your question requires reflection and analysis by somebody more capable than I.
My sense, just adding on to that, is, So I think these
but
are
you
not,
still want the British to apologize.
if
What I'm saying is that, but we are creating a culture in the country where every small group, if something had happened to them, they want the government to follow. That is what I'm objecting on.
I mean, when in the late 1980s, when Mandal and Masjid were going on, my esteemed teacher, Professor Dharma Kumar, whom Mohan also knew, said, "We have become a nation of grievance collectors." And I said, no, we are from grievance collection, we have become a nation of grievance articulators. So I think that you're absolutely right. Everyone has a complaint, and of some kind or the other. And I don't think the British should apologize. If the British were to apologize 100 times, it would not make Indians more content or prosperous or peaceful. Let's be, so I think, okay, yeah.
Well, no, I had another point to make, a different point. After my Punjab book and my South India book, and by observation of life across India for a long time, I've reached one very obvious but very important conclusion, and please listen to this very carefully. We have opinions, we don't have knowledge. We have opinions about one another. We have opinions about other groups. We don't study other groups. We don't listen to other people. If we learn to listen to other people and study other people and their situation, things could change a great deal. And the linguistic redistribution of South India, to return to our subject, was, I think, a wonderful thing. Absolutely wonderful that people could speak to the government in their own language. It gave a sense of pride, it was convenient, it was practical. But the new map somehow made it easy for people to think of those across the linguistic border as rivals and sometimes even as enemies. This was not necessarily the case. The Europeans who came early on always said they met so many South Indians who spoke so many languages. Bilingualism, multilingualism was a common feature of South India. And I think if only, so this book is written for North Indians to understand South India, but also for South Indians to understand their South Indian neighbors.
Hi. Thanks. Thank you so much, Mr. Gandhi and Ram. Just to pick up on something that Ram said earlier, I've known you for so many years, it's been my privilege, and I agree with what Ram was saying, that I think you should be doing your autobiography. You've led a fascinating life, and we'd like to know a lot more than the historic facts, the individual facts. And that applies to you too, Ram.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Suresh. As a footnote to that, Mohan, I would say what one would love is a memoir, not an autobiography. And knowing you, it will not be I, me, myself. I knowing you, I know that it will not be that. But the kind of extraordinary people, circumstances, situations you've lived through, met, been influenced by, have collaborated with, so give it a thought.
But my problem, Ram, is A, my memory is not particularly good. B, I haven't even actually preserved in my own mind, let alone on piece of paper, some of the more interesting conversations I've had with people. So there I've been a very bad example. So when I study some history, I'm very thorough, try to be quite meticulous, and I love what I find anything interesting. But I have a very strong feeling that my memoirs would be very dull.
I don't think so at all. Here's a further suggestion. Just start writing, and Usha, please take this seriously, and Najim also. From your first memory, you were born in 1935. Now, don't go beyond, shall we say, 1960.
Then I can't bring her into the picture.
That can be volume 2. That can be volume 2. That can be volume 2. Or she can write about that part. All right. I mean, the kind of people you've known. I've just the kind of strange stories that I've heard from you and from Mohan and from Ramu, and the crisscrossings and coming into your Hanuman Road house, and of course South India, North India, Kafar Khan.
Well, you pick up these stories, you remember these stories more than I do. I mean, this man is astonishing the way he does that. So, but not everybody is like him. I'm me.
Can I tell a story that I have your permission to tell a story about which brings in North India, South India, and Rajmohan Gandhi and his family? It may be totally apocryphal, but it deserves to be told. Rajaji, as you know, about many other things, wrote classic versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. All of you know that. Right. All of you have read it. How many of you have read it in English? How many of you have read it in Tamil? Well done. How many of you have read it in Hindi? No. Now, that's the story. Now, this book was written in Tamil. Rajaji's mother tongue was Tamil, which means Rajaji's daughter's mother tongue was Tamil. So Mohan's mother tongue is Tamil. He's urging us to learn Hindi, ask him how good his Tamil is. But that's a separate question. I'm not going to push him on that. That's the question.
He's the author of Modern South India.
His father tongue was Gujarati because Devdas Gandhi spoke Gujarati. Now, the father was a Gujarati speaker. The mother was a Tamil speaker. The language of the home was Hindustani, which all of them speak quite beautifully. If to hear Mohan speak in Hindustani is an absolute joy. Next time he comes here, if he speaks to the BIC in Hindustani next time, at least 20% of you will be persuaded to learn that language. That's how beautifully he speaks it. Now, the story goes as follows. The book all of you have read in English and in Tamil needed a Hindi translation. And Rajaji's daughter came forward to translate it. And then that book sold like hotcakes, and the royalties had to be willed. Now, this may be completely apocryphal. Look, please correct me if I've got some of these details. So far, I've got no detail wrong, I think. But some of the details that are coming may be slightly off-key, but are colorful nonetheless, since you talked about color. They were 4 children. She decided to will the royalties to her middle son, the philosopher Ramachandra Gandhi.
Correct.
This is correct?
Absolutely
this
correct.
This is correct, okay. Now, it is said, and this is so far all factual, now the speculation. It is said that she willed it to Ramu, because one son was a civil servant, he would get a pension. The other son had a good job as editor of Indian Express. Ramu had, I think, 13 jobs in about 15 years. And at the time I met him, he used to say proudly, I hold the chair of philosophy at Nattu Sweets. And I've appropriated that. I have shamelessly stolen that. I hold the chair of history at Koshi's Parade Cafe. Now, so it is said that he willed it to Ramu. The reasons, that's true. It is said, these are the reasons that this boy did not have, the Rolling Stone. So the royalties of Rajaji's, the Hindi translation of Rajaji's Ramayana and Mahabharata were willed to Ramu. All right? Yeah. Now, here is the punchline. The royalties of that book went to pay Ramu's bar bill at the India International Center. And he was the most extraordinary conversationalist. How many of you have heard Ramu speak? Okay, you will testify to that. So is the last part maybe added on by Ramu's friends and admirers, or whom I won?
You know, I would like to believe that actually the royalties of the Hindi translations of Ramayana and Mahabharata done by my mother actually did go to Ramu. Because it's one thing for somebody to will, but the publisher has to send the money.
That's true. I think that's a question that has been asked to the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. But this has been an absolutely wonderful evening. And Mohan will stay for a bit to sign books. The books are on sale outside at a handsome discount. Any last words? You can close it. Thank you, and please come back, Mohan. और अगली बार आप हिंदुस्तानी में भाषण दीजिए.
Thank you.